Welcome back. It's time for another Palantir earnings preview today. We will be talking about the upcoming Q2 earnings release that is happening on August 8th. So for a short-term perspective, of course, we want to know what will happen this time in reference to Palantir's last number of quarters, where the stock tends to go down a majority of the time. As you can see, as I have labeled here, the last three earnings reports, in fact, the stock has fallen significant double digits each time. But personally, if you want to know my thoughts, we're going to get into all of the specifics. I think it's about time for Palantir to rebound. Now let's get into why. So what we'll be looking for is top line revenue growth exceeding expectations, of course, and more so talking about the qualitative aspects of that, and Palantir showing strength in that regard. In earnings, the SPAC losses, I expect those to continue to weigh on the financials. Palantir's winding back its SPAC program, so that should limit some of the impact going forward. And then we've got the stock-based compensation normalization, that whole topic with regards to Palantir winding down its percentage stock-based compensation. Hopefully we get more clarity on that. In addition to the profitability outlook, that's what my questions were about on Say Technologies, and any future product developments coming up and driving growth. So the bottom line would be continued progress on making some of the world's best software. We talked about the macro alignment for the last quarter earnings call, and hopefully they're able to talk much more specifically about the impacts of the macro environment in this earnings report and how it's specifically benefiting the financials going forward, and how the growth can start to compound with its commercial division, as we've seen, and getting the government side back up and running again. So with regards to long-term future and mission, I would love Palantir to give more information on this, what they expect to come after Gotham Foundry and Foundry for Builders. Is there anything they're thinking about at this time? I don't expect any commentary on it, but I do hope Alex Karp will once again be on the conference call. Okay, so here are my revenue expectations for when Palantir reports earnings. If you'll see in Q2 of 2020, they actually increased quarter-on-quarter revenue by 10%, and same in Q2 of 2021, they did so by 10%. So they're guiding for $470 million of revenue, but I'm expecting that 10% boost quarter on quarter, as we've seen, has been pretty consistent for the last 2 years. So that would boost us up to $491 million, which would be about a 4.5% beat on the revenue target. And some people are calling for getting figures up to $500 million or more, which would be $500 million in a single quarter, which would be very, very impressive out of Palantir for this quarter. I don't think it's going to happen this quarter. I could be wrong. I think we'll get close. But anyways, Palantir's guiding for 5.4% quarter over quarter growth. And I said I expect them to come closer to that 10%. And they also guide for 25% year over year growth. I think they're going to do much more than that. And if $500 million would correspond with 33% year over year growth, I'm expecting a little less than that. Hopefully they can far exceed the 30% mark. And what makes this quarter a little difficult to forecast is, unlike previous quarters, they talked about a base case for revenue. Usually they just give guidance, so that makes the likelihood of a beat on the top of exceeding the guidance much more likely. But the question is, how much more likely, and what could the beat look like? They really didn't talk much about that in the Q1 earnings call, so difficult to say at this point. But I wouldn't be too surprised if we get close to 500 million. If not, in the best case scenario, exceed 500 million. We'll be talking about that a little more. So what are investors expecting? Well, I did a poll on my YouTube channel. So here are some preliminary results, with the majority expecting, to my surprise, exceeding $500 million in revenue. Remains to be seen, of course. This crowd is biased. Of course, I am biased as a shareholder, but I try to limit that as much as possible. And just to point out that that 500 million figure is what analysts are expecting for the third quarter. So if Palantir could actually leapfrog a whole quarter of revenue, again, I think this is more possible than it usually is because of the more bull case that Palantir presented, and because I think they really limited their guidance, and they're trying to get back to the idea of exceeding guidance when they report. But that's just a side tangent, and most people beyond that bullish crowd are expecting the 470 million just in guidance, just to meet that. Palantir has never not met guidance before in its existence as a public company. And you'll see my expectation of around 490 million, the least popular vote. So we will have to see what happens. But if you just look at the chart below, this is what investors are expecting. That 470 million, just the guidance, is what the investors put down for their expectations and their forecasts. And then for Q3, as I mentioned, that exceeding 500 million is what they're expecting for next quarter, for the September quarter. So if Palantir can do that in the June quarter, that would seriously be bullish. So here are some of my projections. If we take into account what I've been saying so far, I expect Palantir to do around 490 million in revenue. So what would that look like here? We've got my estimates for the second quarter of 2022 shown all the way to the right. Continuing that trend and even pushing it a little higher than we've seen that growth start to accelerate a little bit. And gross profit, same sort of story. Extrapolating this trend and potentially adding $24 million of gross profit each quarter from here on out if this trend holds. I'm expecting an uptick in R&D, and you'll recall how Palantir actually breaks down the stock-based compensation into all of these different categories. But if Palantir is going to be doing closer to 500 million in revenue, I think they're going to recognize a lot of expenses in accordance with that increase. As such, I think we could see an all-time high of the SG&A. I think that's pretty fair to expect. And then the operating expenses, a sum of those two, pretty much pushing higher as well. So where does that leave us for the operating income? Again, this is including the stock-based compensation and my estimates. And I think we will come in with an operating loss, obviously, but maybe Palantir could surprise and get much more closer to break even. Not expecting that this quarter, but I think they are working their way towards it. And in regards to net income, I think Palantir could post one of its better quarters, if not its best quarter, in terms of the net loss of the company. And I think that could be some of the narrative that Palantir pushes around striving for profitability and getting closer and closer for that to become a reality within the next year or two. So overall, on the conference call and in the investor deck that they provide, I want to hear once again about how they're able to, with their bread and butter, turn intangible information to actionable insights for alpha generation, because that's what they do, that's what they're paid for. And as long as they can continue to do that the best and grow and scale beyond anyone's expectations, the company will be wildly successful. So finally, I always like to close with this. The difference between a 30% compound annual growth rate and a 40% compound annual growth rate. 30% would put Palantir at around 12 billion in 2030, and 40% would put them closer to 35 billion in 2030. So this is a huge difference. And the more Palantir can explain its growth story, and better we as investors are going to understand the company. So I'm really looking forward to Palantir pushing the growth on its commercial side and getting the government side back up again. I have a feeling this is going to be one of Palantir's better quarters. I really do think Palantir is due for a double-digit move to the upside, but we will just have to see. Leave a like for good luck. Until next time.